Hello, everybody, and welcome to A QISSAA with Ishika, quintessential and inspiring stories of South Asian artists, funded by the California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellow Grant. I'm Ishika Muchal, and I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I am beyond thrilled to introduce to you my 27th guest and my first guest of 2024, Arpita Mukherjee. Based in New York, she is an award-winning writer and director for screen and stage. She is the co-founder and artistic director of Hypokrit Live Arts, a theater company run by and exclusively developing work by global majority artists, with a specific focus on artists of South Asian descent. Arpita's numerous film and television accolades include directing the short film Running with Danny Pudi, writing the Filmfare Award-winning screenplay for the film Gulmohar, and working on projects with WIIP, AMC, Sony, and an upcoming Netflix feature directed by Meera Nair. Her work has been presented and awarded at numerous film festivals, including the Chicago South Asian Film Festival, New Filmmakers LA, the Indian Film Festival of LA, the New York Indian Film Festival, and CAAMFest. Arpita has also taken the stage by storm, making her Broadway debut as resident director for The Kite Runner and co-writing the Moonsoon wedding musical, which premiered at St. Anne's Warehouse. She has directed and developed numerous productions across New York and California, working with theaters like New York Theater Workshop, the Geffen Playhouse, San Diego Rep, Public Theater, WP Theater, East West Players, Roundabout Theater, and O'Neill Theater Center. She is a 2021 resident director at the Drama League, a 2018 to 2020 Women's Project Lab member, a 2018 Eugene O'Neill National Directing Fellow, and an alumni of the Lincoln Center Directors Lab. I am so honored to welcome you, Arpita.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ishika.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to share your journey. I mean, I've been following your work ever since we met at East West Players, and just so beyond impressed and grateful for all the work that you've done.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Yeah, thanks.
Of course. Yeah, so let's start at the very beginning. I feel like that's a very good place to start, as they say in Sound of Music. How did you get introduced to the arts?
You know, I got introduced to the arts. I was born in Delhi, and both my parents are singers. They sing Indian classical music. So music was always a big part of my life. I studied Indian classical music when I was young. And my parents were really into sort of at that time what was parallel cinema in India. I'm Bengali, so I grew up with Satyajit Ray's films and really great cinema. And we used to go see a lot of classical music concerts, listen to music, and I also would see a lot of theater at the National School of Drama, which is this incredible theater institution in Delhi. So The arts were a huge part of my life growing up.
Mhm.
They were integral to how I was raised. Yeah.
Yeah. And what drew you specifically to directing? I mean, I know you said you were exposed to cinema and theater, but what drove you to that medium within those?
Yeah. I mean, initially, I was born in Delhi, but my parents moved to the US,
Mhm.
and then I moved after them, and there were no plans to pursue the arts.
Mm.
And if anything, initially, I was very inspired by. I also read a lot growing up. I'm
Mm.
a huge avid reader. And in the US, once we moved to the US, we actually didn't go to the theater much
Mm.
anymore because it no longer reflected um,
Right.
our identity and our experience, and also didn't feel that it was really an invitation for us.
Mm.
And at that time there was obviously connection to Bollywood cinema, but
Right.
where I really felt that South Asian representation was thriving was in literature. I remember
Mm.
reading God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. I was
Mhm.
reading a lot of work by Salman Rushdie. That's when Jhumpa Lahiri was, won the Pulitzer.
Mm.
And so I really originally thought I would be a writer, like a fiction
Mm.
writer, because that's where I saw, where people like me
Right.
were thriving. And so I decided to pursue kind of English writing first. But I was always a very big Shakespeare nerd. I had read all of
Mhm.
Shakespeare's plays. I had seen an incredible production of Merchant of Venice in at NSD, and so it felt like theater. There was some theater, a lot of Shakespeare actually happening in DC, so that felt
Mm.
like okay, maybe a way sort of in. But
Yeah.
I kept a day job. I never really had a plan as a young
Mm.
person to direct. But then I started writing my own plays, and then I felt like I had instincts with actors to direct them, and yeah, it was all evolution of finding something interesting and going towards it rather than
Right.
having a plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna touch on what you said about, like, the writing being the space where you found that people were actually interested in the voice of South Asian
Mhm.
artists. That's really interesting because I feel like now we've started to see a little bit surge of, like, people are wanting to see us in the entertainment industry, but it's always wild to, like, see the progression of
Mhm.
what fields were we accepted in and wanted to be heard from in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think initially it was also writers from South Asia writing about
Right,
South Asia,
right.
So I remember reading books by Kamila Shamsi, who's, a cartography Pakistani writer.
Mhm,
And Jhumpa Lahiri was sort of the first person who was
mhm,
writing, who I read, who was a major literary figure writing about what it meant to be in a Bengali. And it was so
mhm,
much my experience. It was also Bengali American family that she was a very resonant figure.
mm,
Um, and so that at that time felt very much where I wanted to kind of be and explore for sure.
right. Yeah, that's incredible, and so you said that you had a day job, and I think that's something that
Yeah.
many artists can relate to as they're starting
Yeah.
out. So can you talk about some of the early experiences and struggles that you had in your journey?
Yeah, I had a day job so that and I had a quite a good day job where my bosses were pretty at that time this was, really like 2009
Mhm.
or something, the 2010, and that time we're okay with hybrid remote work.
Mm,
So
wow.
now everybody's talking about that, but that was the work culture where I worked.
Yeah,
Um, and so I was able to start. The only way I ever knew how to make theater, which was initially what I was doing. I was only doing theater,
right.
was to make my own work. I didn't see anybody doing anything that I wanted to do. So
Mm,
the model for me was always raise money, and like put on my own work. And
right.
so it became pretty clear to me that I needed to be able to kind of parse that through with a day job. And so I started a company in DC called Rasa, and that was the company that was, you know, doing theater, and it was sort of a lovely way to start because it would be our community that would come. It was the South Asian community. It was like friends and like friends' parents and aunties and uncles, and so you could kind of make mistakes and you could just, you know, it was like it was fine. It wasn't so high stakes. So it's kind of how I learned, but I really learned more than under the, you know, the traditional way, which is under the tutelage of some great artist. I mostly just learned theater by making it really on my own. So
I mean, within this field, I've always felt like the best training you can get is through experience. So, I mean, it's worked.
Doing it, So, you know, I got really experienced in producing. Unlike many artists, I'm very comfortable looking at a budget, you know, it's, you know, and understanding how financing a project works. So I kind of developed this very wholesome or holistic rather way of making art.
Sure. And that's so important, I think, especially like if you're already aware that people don't often program your stories, being able to have the power to do it yourself and just like you're saying, holistically create that platform for yourself is so important. So you were talking about how you kind of started as a writer, and I think so personally, I also write, and a lot of the times when I'm writing, I like self-censor in the way that I don't really know what exactly is my story that I have to tell to the world, or like what story is important enough, I guess, to tell. So I'm just wondering, on like a personal note, how have you developed and trusted your artistic voice in the writing medium?
I think that's a great question. I still think I'm developing that trust. I think these are the kind of latent consequences of when a group is underrepresented that I think are harder to articulate and talk about, because we always kind of talk about like the exceptional figures that, you know, represent us, and that's amazing. But you know, what it ends up doing is creating this idea that you're supposed to tell an exceptional story, or supposed to tell the story that they haven't heard from, you know, our part of the world or our cultural experience. And once I started, you know, a company, I was much more producing, directing than writing. And I worked with a lot of writers. Next week, you're gonna interview Madhuri Shekhar, was like one of the first writers I worked with and hung out with in New York when I was still a very unconfident New York director, I would say. You know, once I moved to New York, that was DC. Once I moved to New York and I was doing work in New York, I realized it was a New York town. It was a town that was really about writers in the theater. And so I met, and over the last 10 years, I worked with a lot of incredible writers, and I've developed a lot of plays and musicals, and that made me confident in my sense of story. But it's after that, you know, I worked on Moonsoon Wedding as a writer. A lot of the writing work I did was, in a sense, what I call work for hire, in the sense that there wasn't a lead creative attached, and I was their writer of choice, helping them achieve. And of course, there's tons of my contribution, but it has taken me I'm about to make my short film, my second short film, which I've written and directed. I would say it's taken me this long to really finally say, I've done the work in the trenches. I've written a lot of things. I have worked in Hollywood. I've worked in India, you know, and now I'm ready to really put the focus into the stories I want to tell. Which is the whole reason you become an artist, is to tell the story of yours that helped you and make meaning of your life through that story, and so that other people can make meaning. Like that's the process. And that's hard. I think that's harder than someone else is leading the project and they believe in it, and you kind of going along with the
Yeah.
ride and learning and doing, really like working hard. I've always worked really hard. But I think I've finally entered a phase where I want to start making the stories I really wanted to tell that are from my life or my experience. I've always told stories that I was excited about, never
Sure.
treated it like a career. But that thing of that writer instinct of like, this is the story I want to put in page, I had kind of lost. I used to do it all the time when, when I was writing a lot in as a young writer. And then I wrote a lot when I moved to New York. When I went to Columbia, I wrote a lot in Columbia. But I didn't write like professionally. Weirdly, I wrote very little. And I think it's because this kind of perfectionist syndrome of like really wanting to be exceptional, wanting to even in a way do something, that no one had seen before. And now I've even turned the corner, and I'm reading a lot of screenplays and watching a lot of things, and I'm starting to appreciate even the most simplest narratives, because sometimes the simple story is very tough to tell well.
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of investigation, and it takes a lot of talking to writers who have helped me understand that people write things and they fail all the time, and to not think about that aspect of it and being original as much as just the instinct you feel to even go into developing it is it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, it's such a fine balance, I think, specifically for artists from marginalized or like unrepresented communities of like you're saying, you have there's like this pressure of you have to be exceptional to like stand out.
Yeah.
But it's also like our lives are more than just just the story that people would associate with coming from our culture. Like we have lives that are broader than that, like that stereotype or that one angle, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's hard because, if you're in the Hollywood machine, the mandates keep changing. It's like if you're in the Hollywood conversation, it's as writers, it's very confusing because one moment you're working on something and then no one wants that thing anymore. And, and then, and you just have to remember that, you just have to write the thing in the form that feels the most appropriate for what you're doing. And its time will come, and then you'll just write another thing. And it's kind of, that's more the theater way, it's the thing theater has taught me is that you have to do the thing that is resonant with you as an artist. In Hollywood, there's a lot of like, what will sell, and I think what helps to come from the theater is to kind of just stick with your instincts. This is the story, and because if you think too much about what's selling, what it's too, you will just drive yourself crazy and actually never be able to write something, because ultimately that has to come from our own curiosity about what we're interested in exploring at that moment.
It's like focusing on creating art rather than a product.
Absolutely. And focusing even on the process of making it. It's like, I always say that, all artists have some deep wound they're felt like, I think they're trying to fill. That's how we're made. And the beautiful thing is that actually all humans have that deep wound, but they don't know. They're just living with it, and maybe hurting people because of it. And sometimes seeing art or experiencing art can help them. But we are actually actively trying to like fill that hole. And so it's even interesting to just be in the process of what you're curious about right at that moment. That might be something because you've just experienced a breakup, or that might be because you're experiencing a whole spiritual change, or just had a chat. Like chasing your curiosity at that moment, I think I've discovered after many years of doing it is the most fruitful chase for me.
Yeah. I love that. I remember like really early on in like my journey as an artist, we had done this like check sheet of like what are the top 3 qualities of like a good artist, and one of the top ones that everyone in the group that I was working with had said is like curiosity and like leading from
Yeah.
curiosity. So that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's essential because
Yeah.
if you stop being curious, because it's inevitable that there will be a lot of ups and downs,
Mhm.
in people's careers and people's the only thing that can sustain you is the desire to really learn more and learn
Mhm.
more about yourself or about life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanna go back a little bit to what you were saying about the Hollywood executives and, like, pitching,
Mm.
selling, and theater, and just ask you, have you ever felt like a need to fit in your role as a writer, director, or arts administrator?
I don't think so. I don't
Mhm.
think fitting in was ever it's just a personality thing,
Mhm.
whether that has been hurtful or harmful or helpful, has been is sort of I am, for better or worse, pretty anti-establishment and
Yeah.
anti-structure. It's why I run my own company. I
Yeah.
don't know that I am, um I'm kind of like I kinda like doing things my own way,
Mhm.
and again, I'm not like, "Oh, it's like a badge of honor," because, um, it's my personality. It's
Sure.
who I've been as a child. My parents will be like, "Yes, I've always been very rebellious. I've
Yeah.
always been someone that really likes to, like, challenge things and
Mhm.
challenge systems and ways things are done." Um, and always, like, I have a more entrepreneurial spirit. If I wanna do something and get something made, I will just chase that. I don't necessarily, feel like, "Okay, I have to wait for the system."
Mm.
And even artists that I'm attracted to that I tend to work with have that kind of a spirit. So I think I don't fit in. I know that, I realize that, but even that, I think in Hollywood, in theater, wherever, if you the advantage of just being true to who you are is you will actually find the people that
Yeah.
are you'll actually find the people that you wanna make work with, and that will be at
Sure.
every there'll be certain executives, there'll be certain producers, there'll
Right.
be certain, theater administrators,
Mhm.
there will be certain writers, it's always easy for me to recognize who are the people I wanna make work with, and I
Mhm.
would say one of the great gifts in my life has been that I have made work with, like, just the most incredible people
Mhm.
because of that because of that my own authentic, um, belief in just being my authentic self and not
Sure.
trying to either, fit someone's idea. I work with a lot of writers, not trying to be the director they think I should be. I can only
Mhm.
be the director I am.
Mhm.
Or if I'm stepping in as a writer, I can only have the point of view and the politics that I have. I can't
Right.
have, and not to sort of fit the moment all the time. And so, yeah, I've never really tried to fit in,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean I'm ignorant of what the market is doing.
Sure.
I stayed well informed, so I know what I'm entering, but I'm not someone that is sort of like fair weather changing.
Mhm.
It's too tiring for me, so
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. You were saying earlier that you've been really lucky to have worked with a lot of wonderful people that align with your work style. I just wanted to ask, what do you look for in these collaborators, whether it's writers or if you're looking for someone to direct work that you've written?
yeah. First, it's interesting that it's like dating. I think with the same advice as dating, I think checklists are not super helpful
Mm,
because, uh, you don't know it's a kind of magical thing. I feel it's a
mhm,
connection that is just a vibe. It's just a connection. It's an intuition I use mostly. And because they've been people that have been very different from me. They approach their work actually very differently than I do. And that has been, you know, I've learned from them, or I've intersected with them in an interesting way because both their points of view are very different. But I think I definitely tend to work with folks who are very generous with their time, with their energy, with their they're not, you know, very super competitive. They may be very accomplished, but they're not in a kind of rat race mode, that are independent in their spirit. And but we have to kind of get along, and usually, like, it's that's this like sense of humor. I swear, I just feel like when you go make work with a collaborator, it's exactly like dating. Like, there's either chemistry or there's not, and it's very obvious. Like, I just feel that it's very and you really, while you're making work with people, the relationship becomes intimate. You know, you're really you're feeling each other's feelings, and it's very, and so it can lead to heartbreak. You risk, you know, sometimes collaborations don't work out. But I think you're initially I am at least going into just like, oh, that was fun. I would want to meet that person again. I would want to hang out with that person again. Forget just making work, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with people you make work with.
Yeah. That's such a fun analogy, and it makes total sense.
It's like dating.
That reads so loud. Yeah. So when you are directing work that maybe you have not written yourself, what is the type of material that you're drawn to, and what makes you drawn to that?
I'm drawn to material where the protagonist, the writer, the main characters are wanting something and making bad decisions. I'm drawn to characters who are very aggressively going through life and making bad decisions. I think in theater specifically, you know, a great theater maker, Natasha Sinha, actually taught me this question, which I love, which is, why is it theater? You know, when you work across forms, it's a lovely question to ask. Why is it in this form? So in theater, I love things that are very theatrical. They really embrace the live form. They really abstract space and time and are playing with language. So I tend to like things like that. I think that's why I like working on musicals, because there's sort of this like the most heightened way I think live performance operates. And in film and television, it's a little bit different. Film, I'm attracted to material that is visually really interesting, worlds, places I haven't been, and the characters' interiority. And in TV, I'm very interested in like how the characters are gonna kind of, you know, stumble through life and make wrong decisions. But yeah. And you know, of course, I tend to be really interested in South Asian stories. They could be very similar to my experience, but mostly they're very different. But I think it's more a function of it's like who I am. But I tell people that I feel like even if I wasn't South Asian, I'd be like a South Asian studies major. I love South Asian culture. I think it's so deep. I think it inspires things I do even when they're not South Asian. It's whether it be ghazal poetry or, you know, Carnatic music. I just, or like the great history of the South Asian subcontinent, you know. I just find it fascinating, and I feel, you know, I could probably do that work for all of my life and only scratch the surface. So it's just a great interest of mine, and has been.
Yeah, I mean, South Asian culture is so vast. I mean, within each country, like there's, I think, 8 or 9 countries that make up the South Asian area. And within each of them, there's so much diversity and so many different cultures and styles and histories. It's just like you're saying, you could start digging and just keep on digging,
Yeah.
like lives on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like great mythology, great,
Mhm.
a really complicated history,
Yeah.
a fairly complicated present,
Yeah.
and a future that, remains to be imagined. And
Mhm.
so I feel that that's where I draw a lot. It's just a place that I've, just always studied deeply. It's not
Mm.
even also something I've taken for granted. I read a lot of history.
Mhm.
I'm really interested in how did we become who we are.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the process of picking material that you haven't written. How is that different from, say, when you direct something that you have written yourself?
I've only really this is my first foray into really directing something I've written.
Okay.
My short will be the
Yeah.
first time I would have done that.
Okay.
And I'm really enjoying it,
Mhm.
because it's very much, and I think I understand why in film this is so prevalent,
Mm.
writer directors in film. There's a lot more writer directors in film than in television, and they're actually quite rare in the theater.
Mm.
But it really feels like it's come from me, and it really feels like I'm immersed into the world and
Yeah.
this everything in a slightly different way, but not so different, because I very rarely direct things that just come to me and I just direct them.
Mm.
I'm a very new work director, so in theater, everything I worked on has been very much from the development stage, from
Mm.
sometimes very early stages, but I'm always working very closely with the writer. That's the experience I know the most in theater.
Okay. Yeah.
And when you do Shakespeare, which is the other experience I know, you're really, I'm pretty irreverent when it comes to directing Shakespeare, so you're really doing whatever you
Yeah.
want with the text because Shakespeare is dead. So it's so much about the director's concept. It really
Yeah.
feels like it's, how you're seeing the text and how,
Mhm.
how you're using the text even to explore
Yeah.
something you're curious about. So, so I think in a way it's not so different. I think if I was a director that was like directing a lot of second productions or third productions, or,
Mm.
doing a lot of plays that had already been done, it might be different. But and in
Mm.
TV, you're building kind of together everything
Right. Right.
completely new. So it's more in my wheelhouse. I think I naturally tend to want to be in on things on the ground floor rather than
Mm.
kind of come later,
Yeah.
um, and do my job. Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said about being irreverent in your style of directing Shakespeare, 'cause, I've had this conversation with so many people who are, like, fellow artists and who work with
Mm,
classics, and, I've always kind of struggled with the idea of bringing something written in a certain time period and bringing it just as it is into now.
mhm.
Like, that
Yeah.
feels very insensitive to me sometimes, and this is just, like, me speaking from my
Mhm.
own
Yeah.
personal experience and preference, but
Yeah.
I love the fact that you're willing to see it as a piece of text that is meant to be brought into whatever time or people or, like, experience or culture or world that you're working in, rather than just sticking so dead fast to how it was written, but, like,
Yeah.
actually bringing it into the now and to the people that you're working with, because I think
And
that's
I'm
so
pretty
important.
and I feel that feels very in spirit
Mhm.
Shakespeare.
Yeah, yeah,
Shakespeare wasn't some, like, elite, like, lock this up, and like,
right.
Shakespeare directed and wanted the plays to be funny and,
Mhm.
change things depending on how the audience reacted. Like,
Right.
I feel that it is about using the text to tell something specific that hasn't been told yet, or
Right.
there's no reason to do, you know, Macbeth for the 5,000. Like, we don't need it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, But
Yeah.
no one really asked me to direct Shakespeare, so I haven't had a chance to flex that muscle. But if I did, I don't think I would be doing a kind of traditional production of it.
Absolutely. See, and that's something that I would be very interested in seeing. A
Yeah, I
non-traditional.
have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of ideas to
Yeah.
do, to redo for revivals. But
Mhm. Yeah. Talking about ideas, what was the idea or impetus behind starting Hypokrit?
Well, it was I started Hypokrit with my co-founder, Shubhra
Mhm.
Prakash, who I met because she wrote a play that she
Mhm.
was producing and putting on at a downtown festival. And that's how I got, kind of re-immersed into theater, because I was
Mhm.
really more focusing on writing
Mhm.
when I moved to New York. And what was really interesting was, we clicked, like, again, it was like vibe, we
Right.
wanted to make something together. And I don't think we thought through, like, it wasn't like, oh, 5 year this company. I mean, I think
Yeah.
maybe we did, but initially we were like, I wanted to make Romeo and Juliet, also talking about Shakespeare,
Mm.
in this kind of like Bollywood aesthetic. I had this
Yes.
idea of how Romeo and Juliet really spoke to how narrative structure in Bollywood films works, and this was
Mhm.
traditional Bollywood cinema, and that there could be pieces of it we could actually take the text out and just musicalize, because
Mm.
in moments like that in Romeo and Juliet, that's what would happen in a Bollywood film. So, like,
Right.
I had this concept, and I just,
Yeah.
and Shubhra really liked the concept, and then I really thought, Shubhra was played Mercutio in it, and like we were gonna gender bend,
Mhm.
and like we were just excited about doing that, and the vehicle to do that felt like a company, because
Yeah.
and to raise money and do it, and I think because that play ended up doing well and we sold out, and there was an
Mhm.
excitement about the company, we decided to continue,
Mhm.
and just do things. And then I think it wasn't until sort of 2 years into it that we realized that we had something, and we better kind of make some plans about
Mm.
what that was going to be, because we also had, lives outside of the company, and things we wanted to do that
Sure.
didn't have to do with Hypocrite.
Mhm.
So it was kind of just, I feel that is so much. I don't know how many artists, but my life has a lot of been like, what do you think? Yes, no, and just do it.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of very future planning. And now
Mm.
I think it's different. Now Hypocrite's been there for 8 years.
Wow.
We do have to do more future planning. We also have a film, Hypocrite Live Arts does theater, Hypocrite Productions does film, TV. So there's
Mhm.
more things to manage and think
Sure.
about. But initially, it was very driven by a story we wanted to tell,
Mhm.
and we were going to be the ones to produce it. So let's have a company.
Yeah.
That was kind of that was it. Yeah. It
Yeah.
was like a drunken night, that usually, I think many theater companies start this way. It's like, and companies start this way.
Yeah.
I think they survive because of people's passion
Mhm.
and endurance. But yeah, that's was the thought. There wasn't some very radical idea at that time.
Sure. Yeah, and I love that the work that you do and the people that are the creators in Hypocrite are all people of the global majority or BIPOC,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically focusing on South Asian work, I just wanted to ask you because South Asia, and like we talked about, is such a broad and diverse umbrella. How do you, as the artistic director, expand and define what it means to be a South Asian artist or what it means to be a piece of South Asian work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a big, long, complicated question. And I think we had to originally do a lot of work because, India tends to kind of dominate
Right.
the South Asian subcontinent
Mhm.
narratives. So our first conscious effort was definitely to at least expand into Pakistan, and so we work with Pakistani writers and Bangladeshi writers, and eventually it'd be great if we could also include countries like Nepal and Bhutan and other and then there's the idea of also the diaspora, which is not which
Right.
is and that diaspora is wide. There's the American diaspora, there's the Indian, Afro-Caribbean community. There's a huge diaspora in Africa. So it's kind of a huge umbrella that we operate under.
Right.
And usually companies like ours, they also focus very much on work that is South Asian American, and we're not quite that.
Right.
We are in a way kind of borderless. So in a way, we just have to say that because we have to define that, especially for grants.
Sure.
Where they want to know what you're doing and how
Yeah.
your work is focused and what's the community but it's really, and it's not always, we've produced things that aren't by writers of South Asian descent. And I think the other thing that's confusing is we can do work by writers of South Asian descent that isn't a South Asian story.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like it's and that can make it tough, because then it's like, well, how do you decide what you're going to program?
Right.
It can really be so, and I think the honest thing that no one ever wants to say out loud in a company is that the company is about the person's taste who is running it, really. And right now that happens to be me and the two creative executives that work with me. And so it's that, and it's what we think is going to move the needle forward. And it is about representation, but it's ultimately way more about story. And if that story feels exciting for the moment, and that's how we kind of work on it. But we want to make sure we keep our eyes and ears open for not forgetting the huge swath that when we say artists of South Asian descent is how massive it is and where all it could be. And that is the great reminder then always that there's always going to be a story. Like we haven't scratched the surface, of that, of the region, the diaspora of that region, and the story of diaspora from South Asia is fascinating around the world. So there's go make more stories about it, because that literally there's a lot. And so it's not to forget that, to never feel that it's in fact it's a limitless possibility rather than a limitation. A lot of people say, oh, identity focused companies, which I hate that phrase, are doomed because we run out of things. But I don't find that to be true. If anything, there's so many stories.
Right. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the this episode about, like, one doesn't have to write a South Asian story for it to be a South Asian story, It's kind of like we were talking earlier before we started about American fiction and how the writer is told to write a story that's more Black, but like what does that really mean? Because like I might not relate to Maitri Ramakrishnan's story in Never Have Or Ever, but that's as much of a South Asian story as if I write a story about my South Asian experience, or if I write a story about something totally not South Asian, but it's still going to be South Asian because it's a South Asian story because I wrote it,
Yeah, it's interesting because American fiction is just brilliant, because the thing I find the most brilliant about American fiction is under the guise of the story about, this writer writes this novel that is the expected novel.
Yeah.
That the real story even of the film is this family.
Yeah.
Is this Black family that that's the real story. It's the
Right.
tale of this family and how they cope with loss. And so it's doing this double work of, it's already showing us
Right.
this intellectual family, this
Yeah.
family of doctors and novelists who are fucked up,
Yeah.
and at the same time it's making that social commentary in the space of the writers. So it's that's what I found the most brilliant about it, that I think if it was just doing one thing, it was just trying to make that political comment, I don't know if it would be as successful as its beauty is in its exploration of this,
Right.
the humanity of the family. And
Layers.
but I agree, I also think that because of things like Never Have I Ever, the road opens to different stories. I just ended up, I think a few weeks ago, ended up watching Polite Society, which is so different than Land of Gold. I mean, I think there are already examples of a lot of stories out there. And earlier this year, I got this interesting call that the mandate this year was to just normal South Asian stories, and it just made me, it made me chuckle, because I think it's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
But I think also in the work to I think we're beyond the story of like, am I South Asian? Am I not? What does that mean? I think it's more about just that your identity is happenstance, and how you're living in the world, and whether it be in Bombay or in New York or wherever, is that's informing it more than the sort of the same, the world, the characters, the time in history. Any of those things seem to take more precedence. So we're just now telling stories. We don't have to do the thing that's like a caricature of us anymore. I don't honestly feel that. I think that's actually not wanted. So if anyone out there is doing it, that is the harder thing. I think it's more that when we tell those stories, it's the delicate thing of, you have to imagine a little harder. Hollywood has to imagine a little harder to who. It's not like, oh yeah, let's just cast Jessica Chastain. Like, our stories don't afford. It's a market problem, There's very few people we can imagine even physically now playing us. So it's just about increasing that imagination, welcoming new stars, new actors. I think, that work is just a little bit harder, but I think the stories are there.
Yeah, definitely. I guess this is a great segue to a question about, I feel like there are a lot of conversations around representation and changes within the theater world, within the film world. What are some of, I guess, the expectations that puts on you as an artist of color, and also what are some of the changes that you would like to see in these industries?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think we kind of started talking about this. It's about that expectation of exceptionalism, and that right now, I feel the other danger. It's already happening a lot in other industries, where there's this backlash, culture war of that. A lot of the problems in the world seem to be because of DEI work, that it has reduced the quality of I don't know. Today I was reading a story about planes. Like, somehow people are blaming that for Boeing. I mean, it's kind of stupid. But it's there. It's a part of our culture that maybe we are not engaging in, but it's that conversation is happening. And so I always want to know it. And I don't think it's I think there's always a question of commerce. And I think that's where representation gets tricky. I don't think that there's not a desire to tell.
Right.
I don't know that if I think it is the intersection of commerce and art that that make it really hard for artists and make it harder to greenlight certain projects because you can't think of too many stars that can back it. Sometimes it's hard to think of a director that feels culturally appropriate and has a big enough name to sell your project. Those are usually the questions, and those things it's easier because there's so many folks who've been doing it. There's so many more of a certain community than there are of some other marginalized communities. So that's actually like, it's once you get into it, the intention is always there. It's like, oh, it's a great story, let's tell it. Then it's like, oh, we can't find a star. Oh, we can't find it becomes about commerce. And so I think it's not bad to think about how you can make your work happen outside of those pressures. It's there's just a different way to do it inside that system, and there's a different way to do it outside the system, and both have incredible challenges. And depending on your story, you can, it's and I think that's the great thing that feels unfair for creative people to have to do, because we shouldn't have to do it, but we have to. It's just we have to be the entrepreneurs and the holders of the integrity of something. Because ultimately, if we don't hold the integrity, we're the ones that get criticized. And that is a tricky negotiation. And that's the thing I always am talking about more than the work, really. And that feels not great, but I always try to remember that when I first started thinking about if I wanted to make film, TV, theater, there was nobody like me. There was nobody I could see. And now there are many people I can go to if I have a question. So I think it's only going to get more, because 10 years from now, if someone wants to make a project, they'll be able to be like, and that director and that actor and that. It's going to be more. 10 years ago, there wasn't Riz or Dave or, any of them. And now there's, so it's I have to believe that it's going to be more and more, but it's still far few to sometimes get the project realized in a big way. Like, it's like many people you're going to imagine as Oppenheimer. It's harder if you have Indira Gandhi. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, who's going to be her superstar that's going to play that part? It's harder. It's tougher. That totally means it's worth doing, but those are the challenges for sure. Those are the real challenges, actually, that people are not talking about. They're more like, oh, representation, but how what do you mean? I think we were just started talking about Origin. Like, it's a great study of what happens if you miss the game, or you missed one aspect of the game, and how a great film can. And then you still have to do it, because what I was reading with Ava, that Ava didn't want to make it like so specifically in the studio system, because the studio system she wanted the film to come out in 2024. So if that's the thing, you may have to do a harder way to do it. And so you have to negotiate those that feel that's not about the nuts and bolts of writing a screenplay or editing a great film or like doing a great mix, which is the things where we really thrive. But we have to negotiate all these other things too.
And I think it's such, like, to me, it's so ironic, like the commercial hesitations that come up when people are like, oh, we're not gonna be able to sell it because you don't have like a big name attached to it, or whatever that limitation is. For me, like, when people look at it as like, oh, that's a risk, I feel like if you chose the more interesting choice, it's a leap into like you were saying, a different type of imagination. And those films, statistically, that highlight the stories of people who don't often get seen on the big screen are the ones that like sell out the box office. Like, there are so many studies by like UCLA and USC Annenberg charting box office records for like the last couple of years, and all the films with like POC leads have done so wonderful. It's just like about taking that leap into imagining what a different film could look like, and actually trusting that it could succeed.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes that's a question of, yes, you can get away with it in a certain budget, but maybe you can't get it, you know, that
Right.
all these and sometimes it's just like, because there are few people, the person you want isn't available.
Right.
Like in theater, we have this problem a lot where it's very tough to cast. If you want to cast something very specific with a very specific language requirement,
Yeah.
it's very difficult because there are not that many actors available. Actually, a lot of them are acting in film and television because it plays better, which I have no qualms about. Like great,
Right.
you should do that. But what it ends up doing is, when I have a very specific story where I need actually a very regionally specific actor too, like just won't do general South Asian, you know.
Yeah.
The work is better because it's so specific, but I
Yeah.
might find it harder to do it.
Sure.
So there might be the reason that there's less of it. Actually, it's not. It's because the system is actually is not designed to support it. So it's like trying to push something through that the system is not designed to. So it's like, we're not reimagining the system, we're still trying to push things through
Yeah.
in an old system, and that
Yeah.
requires. But I think there are companies that have rethought their system, and they have been more successful because of reimagining and also thinking of the world more globally.
Yeah.
Helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that we need more South Asian artists.
Yeah, we do. Definitely more. Definitely.
Yeah. Can you share some of your experiences working in film and TV, like working with Danny on Running or working on Gulmohar?
Yeah, I think I've been pretty fortunate. My foray into working film television has been intense and gratifying, and like like a grad school, since I did study it. You know, I met Rahul. Rahul actually hired me to be Amira's assistant. And then we got on Monsoon Wedding. We have this long relationship. And so I was very happy when he wanted me to co-write his directing debut. And I'm very happy with, I love the film. And I had a great experience working with him and learning, you know, kind of the nuts and bolts of screenplay writing. I've learned a lot about it from writing, you know, other screenplays, and the experience of working with Danny. You know, we started out Danny's short Running, which he wrote as a play. We were actually developing a theater production together, and because the pandemic happened, we had some grant funds. Actually, we decided to go to East West Players and enact, and said, you know, what if we came together? And first, I think we were trying to make it like an online video game. Then we realized very quickly we had no skill to do that. And so then, you know, we kind of ended up on this short film. And the amazing thing is that I had the support of these companies and just a great, you know, lead producer and a real ability to kind of learn and experiment with what we wanted this project to be. But in that process, I learned a lot about filmmaking and directing. And so I'm really glad that that was our first short. And it obviously gave me a lot of confidence that this short has been really loved at festivals across the country. We've shown it so many places, so many people have loved it. We're actually going to release it on Vimeo in mid-Feb for people to just see now, now that its festival run is over. So I've been very lucky to have had a really lovely. I've collaborated with some incredible artists. I've collaborated with great playwrights, and I'm really excited about the future of Hypokrit doing more things. Us producing our own things. I've met, you know, wonderful producer that works with me, Apurva Charan, who produced Joyland, and then I have, you know, Neill Gupta's the creative exec and the associate producer for theater. So I feel like we have this like great team, and we're just excited about the future, and I'm excited about, like I said, making my own the stories I've been waiting for a while. I've been in this really wonderful, supportive, and magic grad school where you come out and people love Gulmohar and people love the short, and it's amazing. It's more than I could ever ask for. And in a way, it's been really interesting because it's something I got much quicker in film and TV than I did in theater, which is like a thing I'll write and ponder over in my memoir on one day. But it's lovely. I feel very, very happy working in film and TV. And despite everything, we've talked a lot about Hollywood and everything. I've been really inspired by things like Past Lives.
Yeah.
By, The Farewell. I've been inspired by things like Polite Society or We Are Late. Like, there's just so much. It really makes me think about when I was 14 reading God of Small Things and then Jhumpa and then Rushdie and then Kamila Shamsi, like thinking, wow, what an excellence club. I feel very similarly in film, TV, and I feel very similarly in theater. This season in New York, this last season, when Moonsoon Wedding, as you said, came out in the summer that year, we had Public Obscenities. It's an incredible play Amisha Chaudhry wrote and directed and just won the Obie. We had this amazing play by Deepa Purohit about, speaking of, South Asian diaspora, immigration it was set in Uganda. East Africa, actually, maybe not Uganda, East Africa though, and Gujarati family called Illyria, which was an amazing play. Then there was Moonsoon Wedding, and then Life of Pi was on Broadway. So I the amazing thing is like I always feel like I'm like cheering someone on or someone's cheering me on, and so but yeah, it's I feel like in a good place to be able to chase some things and not feel as daunted by the challenges that I did before.
Yeah. I think that's such a lovely part of the South Asian artist community is that because we're relatively small, like of course there's so many people in it and it's an ever expanding, growing thing. I feel like whenever I see someone succeeding, it feels like a win for all of us, and the community is so supportive. Like, I mean, I'm so honored to like get to talk to you and so many other people on this podcast itself. It just learning and growing from your stories, and just everyone always seems to be like building and lifting each other up, which is really nice.
Yes, I think at our best we do that. Wow, absolutely. And there's way more of that now than there was when I first started thinking, dreaming about doing this. So that's all. I think it's all encouraging, and as long as we keep building on it and don't lose the way of curiosity for trying to fit something or fit the market, we will be all right.
Yeah, and not trying to operate from that idea that there's only like one or two spots, or like the zero sum idea that there's enough space for all of us. We're not all competing for one or two roles.
If we're brave enough sometimes to carve it, there isn't actually. I mean, we just look at one system, there isn't. But if we're brave enough to carve it, if we're brave enough to do things in a slightly in the way that honors the story rather than the system, then I think yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna tattoo that on the inside of my brain. Okay, what advice would you have for aspiring artists, specifically those of South Asian descent?
Oh man, I mean, I always like to tailor advice specifically to what people are doing, but actually I was having this conversation with Neill, who works with me, I think on Friday night, well into Saturday morning actually, but is that I think it takes a long time for an artist to understand how they want to sustain their work as an artist. And that can be and look many different ways. And I think the real experience of being an artist is to keep understanding that about yourself rather than trying to fit something that exists already. Whether that be like the life of a New York director or an artistic director at a regional theater or a studio executive or a freelance TV director. You kind of have to figure out how you can, because the industry is brutal and we've talked, it's tough, it's all those things. And I think the real important journey for an artist is to figure out how they can sustain their art making. that might mean they need to live in some remote area and right there and actually don't need to be in a city. That might mean they need to absolutely be in the city and do, that process is the least talked about process of being an artist. Like people are always like, not work, that's not, it's like, actually you have to understand how, as an artist, can you sustain artistic practice and your mental health. Like that'll all anyway gets tied in together.
Right.
And that is very different for each person. And shouldn't look like anybody else's journey. And that's not to success. I'm just saying to sustain your artistic practice.
Right.
The most common thing that happens to artists is they burn out, or they can't do it anymore, or and if you want to do it, but you want to do it in a way that maybe means you want to have a family and you actually want to do it 9 to 5, that's fine. I don't think that that's not fine. But if you can listen to yourself and figure out what that means for you, you can be very happy being an artist, which is a tall order.
Yeah.
But people who have listened to themselves and discovered that about themselves, I think have figured out the key.
Yeah. That's such an important question, like logistically. To stay as an artist. Yeah. Really important. Something to think about for sure.
Something to really think about.
So this show is called A QISSAA with Ishika, and QISSAA means episode. So I like to ask each one of my guests, what was one influential QISSAA that really shaped your experience as a person or an artist or both?
Oh man, that's like, just once. Okay. I feel like every day, right? Something every day. Every day something is shaping me as an artist. But I'm just trying to think that I was just talking about this with my husband, and that if I have to really think about probably the most defining thing about me, it just encapsulated in an episode, is that the first films I remember watching are these like very art parallel films, and being too young to watch them, like definitely too young, and like didn't understand. Like I remember first, there's a wonderful Satyajit films. That's the QISSAA called Shaka Pro Shaka, which is about a family gathering. It's actually like a stunning film. And I remember, I think I was like 6 or something when my parents put it on, and I had no idea. But somehow it stayed in my brain in a way that later made me go back to not only that film, but films like that. And that always pushed me to try to grasp and do something and try to understand something that wasn't within my reach. So I feel like this idea of challenging your children, not even by like, it's not like they gave me a quiz after, or they were like, did you understand it? But that they allowed me to be in a more adult, a more mature space, I think ended up making me less afraid of things like, let me just learn screenwriting. Let me just be in the space and learn. And it's okay that I don't know it yet. And I'm not the most, and that challenge, or actually excitement of being inside a process that might be challenging for me. I think that was the episode. That's a 6-year-old trying to watch this like film that I think 40-year-olds don't understand. And grappling with it. I'd say that.
Yeah, that's so important. And it speaks to like you were saying, the importance of a wide variety of exposure from a young age, and also just like to have parents and like a family system that supports you and believes in you is so important. I mean, I know that I wouldn't be anywhere if I didn't have that. So just
absolutely. Yeah, that's
very vital.
Important.
So as we are about to close out the show, but just wanted to ask you if you have any current or upcoming projects that you can share, and where would be the best place for people to find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I said this before, but Running will be coming out on Vimeo mid-Feb, so you can follow. I think the best way to follow sort of really all my work is really social media. It's where things happen. You can follow Hypokrit, both film, television, theater, on Hypokrit NYC, which is HYPOKRIT NYC, and that you can stay up to date when running comes out. And then you can also follow me on PITA 625, and for more personal updates. But you can really get it on Hypokrit NYC.
Yeah, exciting. And you, I think, are working with Mira and I on something as well, the film?
We're working on things, but nothing to announce right now, especially with Moonsoon. But you know, the next thing is running will be coming out. I'm also making my short film, but we're nowhere close to making announcements on any of those things.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, we'll stay tuned. We'll keep our ears and eyes peeled.
Yeah, but they'll all get announced, and the year has started so many exciting things, hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, I would just want to thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing your story, your advice, and just being such an inspiring person to follow and learn about.
Thank you, Ishika. This was really fun and a
delight. I'm so glad. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing the other artists that come through and listening to their stuff. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of, thank you for everyone who tuned in to watch. And also next week's QISSAA is with Madhuri Shekhar, a playwright whom you have worked with many times. And it's not on a Sunday this time, it's on a Friday, but at 12 p.m. PST. So keep that in your mind that it's not a Sunday. Our shows are usually on Sundays, but this one's on a Friday. All right. Well, thank you so much again to everyone watching, and thank you, Arpita, and till next Friday.